This is the game I was going to play with you guys, and so this one's not a speed test or anything like that. This one is, is it chocolate chip or is it oatmeal raisin? So this is on the honor system. So you just keep tally of whether you win it or you get it right or not, okay? So chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin? Who's scribbling on the screen? It is oatmeal raisin. I don't know if you got that one right or not. Next one. Chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin? Stop that. It's chocolate chip. Oatmeal raisin or chocolate chip? Oh, he's still writing on. Good grief. That is chocolate chip. You're wrong. You're wrong. All right, next one. Oatmeal, what is it? Oatmeal raisin or chocolate chip? Oatmeal raisin. Oatmeal raisin or chocolate chip? 3, 2, 1. Oatmeal raisin. Wrong again. Oh, man. That's awful. All right. Which has more calories? Oatmeal raisin or chocolate chip? 3, 2, 1. Chocolate chip. Hey, you got that one right. All right. And which one has more sodium? Oatmeal raisin or chocolate chip? It is oatmeal raisin. Very good. Got more salt in there. Which one? That one almost looks like blueberry muffins. I'm not sure exactly what that is. In fact, chocolate chip. I think you were writing down a combination, Joseph, of something that was both chocolate chip and oatmeal. I'm not sure on that one. All right. Last one. What percentage of Americans say chocolate chip is their favorite? So before I reveal, I'm going to have you all unmute. All right. So Joseph says 100% Americans. What about the Lachlan boys? What do y'all say?
Because if you think oatmeal cookies are your favorite, you're not American.
What percentage of Americans?
100%.
Joe says 100. I'm going to say somewhere more around 60.
100%. No, they're not American.
Okay, so he says 60, and if they're not 100%, they're not American. It's actually 53% say that is their favorites. So I tend to agree. If it's a toss up between the two, well, I'm going to have to mute Joseph.
The other 47% of those people, they're not American.
Well, they probably don't. It's probably not. It can't be oatmeal raisin. Oatmeal raisin can't be the other 47%. I don't think that.
You can't like oatmeal raisin.
Yeah. I don't think that's the case. But anyway.
One of the reasons I wanted to play that game was because oftentimes we may get questions about God or our faith or whatever, and sometimes we think, man, I don't really know what to say here. I mean, maybe it's chocolate chip, maybe it's oatmeal. I don't know exactly how to answer that. And so part of our goal of this series is to help you have some answers, maybe for yourself, or maybe it's just for someone else who's asking you questions.
So before spring break, we talked about how we're not supposed to have a blind faith. It's just, and how even the Bible explains, and we see examples of apostles did not expect people to just believe. When you think about who the initial hearers, if that's a word, of the gospel, who they were, that actually kind of makes sense because many of them were devout followers of the Torah and of the Mosaic law. And the idea of the Messiah coming and being entirely different than what they thought he was going to be, and then dying for our sins and raising from the dead, these are things that were just as hard for them, if not harder, than for us to understand. You know, when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's just as hard to have that conversation as it is with the other people. So, or rather, it's just as hard for them to have believed it just like for us. because they're coming from a system that is very much steeped in tradition, and it's been around a long time, and Moses was held in very high regard. So the point is, though, they were not asked just to believe. They were asked to look at the evidence and make a decision. And it's something that we have to do today as well. So there are a ton of questions out there that we often ask ourselves or get asked by other people. And I want to do our best to try to keep this series going, even though we got the coronavirus and everything else. And so I want to try to address the big ones, so to speak. I'd love to attempt to answer every question you may have, like as if I could do that anyway. But a lot of times when we answer one question, it leads to another question, which leads to another question. So rather than just let everyone ask questions, at least right now, perhaps some of the things we can talk about will address your question as we go along in this series. So with that being said, we have to start somewhere. So let's start with our lesson here. So I'm using a book. If you're interested in reading Dinner with Skeptics, it's by Dr. Jeff Vines. It's a good story. And so I want to encourage you to read that. So the question that we're going to talk about tonight is, how can we believe in a God when there is so much evil in the world? How can we possibly believe that that's taking place? So here's what I'm going to like to do right now. This software has a really cool feature where I can create breakout rooms. So I can put y'all in a room and y'all can discuss amongst yourselves what you think about this question. How would you answer this question? Let's take a couple of minutes to discuss how we could answer that question. If we're given that question to or somebody's asked us that question, how could we answer it? So here's one way you can approach it. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint going. So here's how I want to give you maybe a strategy, at least. If someone asks you that question, now odds are they might not ask you that exact question. I understand that, but if they were to ask you that question, here's a line of thinking you can go by and say, okay, is there such a thing as evil? If you say, how can we believe in a God when there's so much evil? We say, okay, is there such a thing as evil? If we can agree on that and say, yes, absolutely. Most people would say, absolutely, there's evil in this world. To say, okay, if there's evil, then are you assuming there's also such a thing as good? And again, most people would say, well, sure, I can tell the difference between evil and good. I know that's the case. There is evil and there is good. And if you figure that and get to that point with that conversation with somebody, say, okay, now, who or what gets to tell us which is which? Who gets to tell us? If there's evil and there's good, who or what gets to tell us what's evil and what is good? Because that's important. Because some people will say, well, we're born with an innate desire. We know an innate moral code. We have this understanding of what's evil and what's good, which in some ways you might be able to challenge that to a certain extent, I guess. But the final part is if you say, okay, here's the deal. If there is such a thing as moral law, if there's this universal sense of right and wrong, wouldn't that law have to be universal and unchanging? Can that universal moral law, can it ever be changed? Does it apply to everybody? Otherwise, it's hard to be universal if it doesn't apply to everybody, right? It only applies to Americans. Only Americans have to do this or this. Or only in South Korea or only in North Korea, they have to do this and this, and that makes it okay. No, if there's a universal moral law that we have in kind of embedded in us, then there's absolutely a right and there's absolutely a wrong, and it doesn't just change with the wind. It stays that way all the time. Let's see, what did my next slide say? here's the problem if we don't have a universal understanding of right and wrong. I don't know if this, well, I'll just say it. Any accusation of somebody doing something evil won't stick. Like if you went to court and you said, hey, what you're doing is wrong. If there is no universal moral code, then they can say, no, it's not. What I did was right in my mind. It's right in my country. It's right or whatever. And any accusation of someone doing something evil won't stick. Absolute accusation requires an absolute law. Now, don't worry, I'm going to give you all a chance to talk in just a second. Now, yes, we do have some people who think that they don't think lying is wrong, or at least they say it's so. There are those who consider murder not to be wrong, and we sometimes typically call them insane or sociopaths or whatever, right? But the majority of the people believe that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong. I don't think anyone would ever come to an understanding and say, well, in this instance, rape is okay, right? That's pretty universal to say that's wrong. So because there's a moral law within every human heart, it's maybe one of the greatest one of the greatest proofs of God's existence. Otherwise, who can say that what Hitler did was wrong to kill all those people in the Holocaust? Especially if we're just random molecules put together by chance, and we believe in survival of the fittest in its truest form, then we can't say what Hitler did was wrong. I wouldn't be able to say what he did was wrong because there would be no absolute law or rule to it. Usually people can agree that at least we have a moral law within us that knows when an injustice has occurred, right? We see something that happened, we're like, no, that's wrong. They've been wrong. That shouldn't have happened. And so the follow-up question, I got ahead of myself earlier, but the follow-up question to that is, who gives us this law? If there is such a thing as absolute law, absolute moral code, who gives that to us, right? Because it has to be an absolute lawgiver. It can't come from someone else. It can only originate from an absolute moral lawgiver. Only the creator and the sustainer of all things has the authority and the knowledge and the power to implant in us the ability to distinguish between good and evil. So what I want to do now is I want to open it up and see what y'all think about that. So that, like I said, you may not ever get asked that exact question about how can you believe in a God when there's so much evil, but if you did have that conversation, you have to start with a grounds, and it's like laying a foundation and just layer by layer of brick after brick after brick to say, okay, let's start down here. If you're saying there's evil in the world, we can all agree there's evil, right? Okay, and good and all that. So what are some thoughts that you guys have? Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about next week, because I found out, by the way, that you guys are out of school until like April 6th at the...
Yeah, we're doing like online class.
Something ridiculous.
Yeah, this is kind of what we have to do for the meanwhile. I am putting online on Facebook. I'm going to put a 3-minute devotional thought on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, just to kind of help you do your God time, because now you got all kinds of time in the world to do stuff, right? So now it'd be
like wait for stuff to come in the mail.
Yeah, you got lots of time. No doubt. You're probably staying up super late and doing all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so those are there for your God time. Next week, during this time, what we're going to talk about is why God would allow so much evil. It's one thing to say, well, there's no God because of evil, right? But then the follow-up question that would be a lot of times, well, so, okay, fine. There's a God and there's evil. So why does he let it happen, right? So that's what we're going to talk about next week. If you have any thoughts about that, jot them down, write them down. We're going to do this again next week. Sunday night, I'm probably going to have a pre-recorded lesson or something like that. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to land on that. But wanted to give you all a heads up about that and the Devos. And basically just stay tuned. There's all kinds of stuff coming out on kind of a daily basis.